We condemn the burial of the dictator Marcos in the Libingan ng mga Bayani, in shameless treachery, in disregard of the facts of history, in contempt of the grief and sufferings of the bereaved victims of martial law, and in defiance of the hopes of our people and their children to build a future based on the values of truth, justice, respect for human rights, and caring for others, members of the 1986 Constitutional Commission said in a statement. This only tells us that Libingan ng mga Bayani is reserved only for the honorable and brave heroes of the Philippines, for a hero should never violate any human rights. If the burial of Marcos at the Libingan ng mga Bayani is acceptable, does this mean that we Filipinos should accept someone who is corrupt, unjust, and inhuman to be buried in that pantheon? Here are the key points or evidence on why Marcos shouldn't be buried at Libingan ng mga Bayani. First, whether the respondents, Defense Secretary, and AFP Rear Admiral committed grave abuse of discretion when they issued the assailed memorandum and directive and compliance with the verbal order of President Duterte to implement his election campaign promised to have the remains of Marcos interred at the Libingan ng mga Bayani. The President's verbal orders, which were the basis for the issuance of the question orders of public respondents, are invalid because they violate Republic Act number 289. Second, the President's verbal orders, the Lorenzana Memorandum, and Enrique's orders were issued with grave abuse of discretion because they violate Republic Act number 10368, otherwise known as the Human Rights Victims Reparation and Recognition Act of 2013. Third, the President's verbal orders, the Lorenzana Memorandum, and Enrique's orders cannot be justified even under the provisions of the Administrative Code of 1987. Given the established circumstances of the Marcos regime and the participation of Ferdinand E. Marcos, there remains no public purpose of the internment of the remains of Ferdinand E. Marcos at the Libingan ng mga Bayani.
Dishonorable discharge through a successful revolution is an extra-constitutional and direct sovereign act of the people, which is beyond the ambit of judicial review, let alone a mere administrative regulation. The People's Revolt was higher than the act of military tribunal or civilian administrative tribunal. The revolution was a successful revolution. Acts of rebels removing the head of stable is legitimate, valid, final, and binding. Fifth, evidence. The President's verbal orders do not provide a definite and complete reason for transferring the remains of former President E. Marcos from his originally intended site as shown in the agreement signed by former Secretary Rafael Alona III and Imelda Marcos, the Libingan ng mga Bayani. Sixth evidence. AFP Regulations G161 to 375 should be stricken down in the absence of clear and unmistakable showing that it has been issued with grave abuse of discretion, amounting to lack or excessive jurisdiction. Neither could it be considered oath embarrassed for purportedly providing incomplete, whimsical, and capricious standards for qualifications for burial at the Libingan ng mga Bayani.
Whether historical facts, laws enacted to recover the ill-gotten wealth from the Marcoses and their cronies, and the pronouncement of the court in the Marcos regime have nullified his entitlement as a soldier and a former president to interment at the Libingan ng mga Bayani. Marcos' ouster from the presidency during the EDSA Revolution is tantamount to dishonorable separation, reversion, or discharge from the military service. Also, the actions of the public respondents are contrary to the President's oath of office because they encourage impunity. Another reason is that the beneficial provisions of the Republic Act number 10368 are not exclusive as it includes the prohibition on Marcos burial at the Libingan ng mga Bayani. The Marcos family is deemed to have waived the burial of the remains of former President Marcos at the Libingan ng mga Bayani after they entered into an agreement with the government of the Republic of the Philippines as to the conditions and procedures by which his remains shall be brought back to and entered the Philippines. Assuming without accepting that the AFP regulations were valid when issued, public respondents gravely abused their discretions when they failed to show that there was an examination of the sufficiency of the facts that would reasonably lead them to believe that the burial of the remains of Ferdinand Marcos at the Libingan ng mga Bayani would be in accordance with the Republic Act number 289 or the various proclamations that identify the locations of the Libingan, considering the findings of National Historical Commissions of the Philippines, the provisions of our laws including the Republic Act number 10368 and this court's jurisprudence.
To summarize our stand, burying Ferdinand Marcos in the Libingan ng mga Bayani would mean turning a blind eye on the injustices he made. The Republic Acts are there to carry out the principles of the Constitution. It has been violated. Marcos was clearly not qualified to be in the Libingan ng mga Bayani. The People Power Revolution is a proof that he is nothing but a traitor. It would be a great disappointment, shame, and insult not just for the victims of martial law, but to our country itself and future generations that the dictator whom our forefathers tried so hard to get ousted in the presidency will be buried on the heroes' cemetery. He is no hero. Him being a soldier and a former president was abrogated, for he was plundering public resources and was the root of sufferings, death, and disappearance of many Filipinos.